Good evening. This is Thạch from Indiana.
Yes,
I'm
hey,
glad to see
how are
you
you?
in Boston. Now, let
Yes.
me introduce you to Professor Phạm Vinh. He is chairman of the Department of Medicine of Tân University School of Medicine, and he was chief of medicine at Tâm Đức Heart Hospital. When you went to Vietnam in
Yes.
2000, Professor Phạm Vinh welcomed you in his hospital. And we have today also Professor Đặng Văn Phước. He is the president of Vietnam Heart Association, and he was there in Vietnam when you visited. So now I ask Professor Vinh to introduce you to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thach.
Hello, Professor Michael Gibson. Welcome you. I'm very pleased to meet you today. Good evening. And we are very pleased to have your lecture today for background for Tân student and for other young doctor in other countries. So I would like to introduce something about Dr. Michael Gibson. Dr. Michael Gibson is professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. He's also CEO of MÉCH Institute of Clinical Research. So he is a well-known doctor in research and in interventional cardiology. Welcome, Dr. Gibson. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me back. I looked back so fondly on my trip to Vietnam and visiting with all of you. Such great memories of going to places like Han Long Bay, so beautiful there. Loved seeing all of you and loved caring for your patients alongside of all of you. Well, thanks for inviting me tonight to talk. I'm talking about what we're calling the democratization of medicine. In our country, we're really talking about how we have empowered patients and how we really have provided greater access to information, have begun to enroll much larger numbers of patients, up to say 180,000 patients, so that we can have a lot more data to make better clinical decisions. I know you have a lot of people interested in AI, machine learning, big data. So we will have a lot of big data doing these big trials. I'm now calling them Giga Trials because we had mega trials. These are even bigger than mega trials. They are Giga Trials. Well, my disclosure is shown here. I have some research grant support from Apple and Johnson & Johnson, the sponsors of that big trial called the Heartline Study. Well, a few years back, I was asked to prepare an article about the democratization of medical research and education. We'll talk about some of the advantages, but we'll also talk about some of the potential perils. Well, I grew up in a place in the United States, in Oklahoma, and one of the towns that I spent a lot of time in was Stillwell, Oklahoma. Stillwell in our country became famous because recently it was reported to have the worst survival of any city in the United States, an average life expectancy of only 57 years. And I imagine other countries, probably Vietnam, actually has a better life expectancy than where I grew up, right here in the United States. We didn't have a lot of money. My grandmother and grandfather.
Mẹ, em về đi anh đổ nước.
I think we're gonna I think we need to have people mute their line. Great. So my grandmother, she gave me a nickel and she said, why don't you go down the street and buy a book? And the only thing I could afford was one part of the encyclopedia that began with the letter C. So my internet was that encyclopedia book, and I was totally caught up with everything that was going on in the world. In 1927, that began with the letter C. The point is, we had a lot of problems with access to information, access to healthcare, and that is associated with worse health outcomes. When I went to college, I was very interested in the intersection of science and culture and society. I'm a painter, as some of you might know. My mother's an artist. So I was always interested in how these informed each other. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. I kind of drew my way through medical school, lots of drawings of Gray's Anatomy. I was a little bit like a monk copying a book. But all that changed when computers came along, and everything else changed when we moved from having glass slides that the key opinion leader owned to having PowerPoint, where you had it in electronic format and you could share your slides. And I began to share my slides back during the internet boom and created a site where we could all share our slides. I thought it was great. But some people got quite upset. It was really breaking their business model. And, I got contacted by a major journal saying, you can't just take tables and make up graphs. We own the data and we own the mode of display of the data. Professional societies threatened me with copyright lawsuits for putting up slides for meetings. And my fellows began to ask, I can't afford to buy the textbook or buy the paper that we've written.
Corona cô, hôm qua cái ông thầy hôm qua đúng rồi.
In fact, I don't know if you want to mute people's line. Can you mute people's line, sir?
Không có định danh, nhưng mà kiểu như là
you might be able to mute everyone's line except the speaker. Okay.
Mike.
Yes.
Xin các sinh viên tắt mute your microphone, especially Staphylococcus. Xin tất cả các sinh viên tắt mic.
Nghe được cái từ đó.
Nguyễn Thị Trà My.
It sounds like people are having a good time at dinner. I'd like to join them, but
xin em nào đang có microphone on đó, xin mọi người tắt đi ạ.
Anh muốn có thời gian cụ thể hả?
Yes, Staphylococcus, mute your line.
Mời dạy trong đó hả?
Okay, thank you. Maybe, no. Well, it got me to thinking about the monk and in me, people who, created content and who really owns the content. Copyright law was really born back with the birth of the printing press. The king actually controlled copyright because suddenly with the birth of the printing press, you could actually create thousands of copies of the content. And the king was very worried that people would begin to say bad things about him. So I don't know if it's hard for me to hear.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Michael, because the whole today have a problem. We can't host.
Can we, is there any way we can mute those people's lines?
I think we cannot fix it because Zoom have problem.
Can anyone send her a text to tell her that we can hear her?
We did.
Anh mới gọi cho em, ý anh như vậy nè, ý anh nói là cái giấy tờ cũ, cái ngày ký trong đó là ngày tháng 1 hay tháng gì á, mà bây giờ anh trên đỉnh đạo.
So should we change the ID and I can host?
Từ tháng 1 mà bây giờ mới trình.
All right, well, I'll just keep going and we'll do our best, okay? I'll start in here. So the king appointed a group of people to look over the content This was a private company, and the books that they approved were entered into a registry, and those were called the Crown Censor. And essentially, early copyright law was a censorship law. It was really created to protect the government and to protect the ownership rights of people who controlled the printing presses. But we've now moved beyond the need for copyright. There really isn't a big cost to creating the content or distributing it. Now the content is easily distributed over the internet, and knowledge can flow very easily and very inexpensively. And that has led to a concept I call copyleft. And it's more than a cute symbol, more than a cute logo. It's actually a legal doctrine, as you'll see in a minute. All of you know this very well. Around the world, salaries for physicians are in some countries quite low. They can't afford a textbook. They may not be able to afford up-to-date. That may be out of their reach. But what they often have is a mobile phone. And we've been trying to create content that all of them can reach over these devices. So we've also moved away from the physician being an individual player to the physician being a team player. In the past, it was publish, perish, but now it's much more of a world of collaborate or perish. So I did create 15 years ago an open source textbook called Wikidoc and WikiPatient. It's free. Never being controlled by any one person, being copyleft. It can be freely distributed, modified. All you have to do is give credit to the person who created the content. And it's been updated millions of times now by 22 positions around the world. Open access is also coming to Europe. Soon to see many more of the articles free in Europe. We're now also talking about how do we share data from our trials, but it has to be done in a way that safeguards patient privacy as well as provide access to the information. So the internet in its first iteration was kind of like a one-way conversation, but now it's much more of a two-way conversation, and patients are able to actually question us. Now, I was a skeptic of social media, and my son made me get on the internet, get on to Twitter, and he had run the marathon in Boston, and he tweeted me, "I'm okay." And I said, "You must be tired." He said, "No, Dad, the bomb just went off outside our house, just around the corner." So I was in the emergency room. I couldn't do a lot, people missing their arms and legs, but what I could do is set up communication channels for people to understand if their relative was there. I began to go onto Twitter and talk about what was going on. It became very clear to me that this was going to be a very powerful way of communicating. These days, everyone's a photographer, not just a professional photographer. And these days, more and more people are citizen journalists as well. The role of open access has been expanded, I think, during the coronavirus epidemic. We've seen a lot of important information be put up on preprint servers where people can quickly and easily access new information before it is peer reviewed. The good thing is it gets out there quickly. The bad thing is that it has not been peer reviewed yet. On the other hand, I do think a platform like Twitter does offer rapid global peer review. There were some scientists who criticized some of the CRISPR baby research, saying the life expectancy would be reduced by 20%. But within 24 hours, another group got online, used the same open access data from the UK, and showed that, that wasn't true. So I do think it is going to be a platform that does provide rapid peer review. Just this week, there was an article that showed from the European Heart Journal that if they used Twitter to promote research articles, those articles had a higher rate of future citations than those they didn't promote. So if you want to get your work out there and get it cited, Twitter can be a good tool as well. You can develop your own voice as an individual. I was ranked 3rd behind the WHO and CDC as an influencer for coronavirus. So if you have a voice, you speak up and you speak wisely, you can be an influencer. You can also work to advocate for your patients. There were some patients writing to me asking if they could get access to compassionate use of the Gilead drug. I got them in contact with them. I got a couple of doctors and people who were in medicine access to the drug, and they were very thankful. And again, this all occurred through social media. So the world has changed in terms of information flow. It used to be much more closed off and secretive. It's now much more open source. Much of the innovation occurred within organizations. Now it occurs across organizations. The information flows much more freely to everyone. And again, it's much more of a copyleft world. You have to be careful though. There are some limitations. You think you're searching Google, but actually Google is searching you. You have to be very careful about how you use all of this content. But I do think we have changed our relationship with patients. In the past, the doctor was a trusted provider who kind of conveyed information in a kind of paternalistic way. The patient wasn't that well informed, and it was a one-way conversation. But now we have to earn the trust of our patients who are more informed, and it's much more of a two-way conversation. And that has led to what I'm calling the Giga Trial, which is really bringing together all these concepts to do studies. You have open access to information, social media, electronic health records, patients reporting outcomes, more and more patient empowerment, wearables, big data, and apps. And when you put all that together, you get what I call the Giga Trial. So when we began, we had observational studies, then some single center experiences, then multi-center experiences. Then there were the mega trials of tens of thousands of patients, but now these are going to be giga trials with, say, up to 180,000 patients. The first one we're doing is one to the Apple Watch. It is a randomized trial, randomizing 180,000 people to either an Apple Watch or no Apple Watch to see if it detects the new onset of documented atrial fibrillation in people over the age of 65. That's the primary question. The secondary question is, so what? So you diagnosed atrial fibrillation. Can you improve outcomes? And the secondary endpoint will now be the risk of all-cause death and all-cause stroke. The exciting thing is that this is costing about 1% of the usual trial. Trials in the past were done in hospitals. It was paper-based. People were followed up in the clinic. This is a virtual trial. People are enrolled by an app, and people are largely followed up by the apps. They say what their outcomes are as part of patient-reported outcomes. And we will see if they lived or died, or if they had a stroke or other outcome based upon our insurance claims databases. So everyone is in the database if you're over the age of 65. With respect to consent, it used to be paper, it used to be based upon your own local IRB, but now it will be electronic, and everyone will use the same consent form throughout our whole country. In the past, the populations were fairly select. They had to meet inclusion-exclusion criteria. That limited generalizability. But now in these new trials, it'll be much more real world. and they'll have much broader generalizability. We always used to be worried, are we going to have enough patients to test the primary endpoint? But in these studies, we're going to be very well powered. We'll definitely test the primary endpoint with sufficient power. But we'll also have enough power to test secondary endpoints as well. This leads to an interesting issue. You know, a result could be statistically significant, but the bigger question will be, is that result clinically significant as well? We're always so excited to enroll hundreds to 1,000 patients per month, but in this new kind of setting, we'll be enrolling, say, 50,000 patients a month. In our first day, we enrolled 1,000 patients in the study. And like I say, the cost of this kind of study is going to be about 1% of what it used to cost. The patient has access to their data at all times. That was not the case in the past. And we're really going to see how well treatments really work in the real world, because in the old world, we had a nurse calling and making sure they're taking their pills. We're going to see what happens when you don't have that kind of nursing oversight to drive compliance. This is what will be interesting to the data scientist. We're going to have the outcomes based upon the ICD-10 codes. And this will allow us to get the events without having humans adjudicate the events, which is much cheaper. Instead of paying doctors for the trial, we're going to be paying the patient for all of their effort that goes into doing the study. Missing data can be a problem in trials. We have to pay people $50,000 to track patients down. But given that we're using an insurance claims database that everyone's in, we won't have missing data. And finally, I do know you have people interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence. We'll have a lot more data on a lot more patients. That data will be available much more in real time, coming from the wearables. Although we'll have a lot of data per patient, we may not have as many variables per patient. We'll have terabytes to petabytes of data for data scientists to go through. And this, I think, will be very important, because I think we are moving away from one-size-fits-all medicine and traditional population statistics over to personalized medicine, where we'll be using machine learning to really individualize treatments. Now, this is a publication of ours recently from one of the TIMI studies. Each little dot is the prediction of machine learning and artificial intelligence about whether someone would have a excess bleeding risk or excess benefit in terms of getting a drug for reducing ischemic events. In the upper right-hand corner, that is a group of people who had both an ischemic event reduction and a bleeding reduction in the yellow blocks. Over in blue are people who had a reduction in ischemic events, but had an increase in bleeding. And down in red, those are people with more bleeding and worse ischemic outcomes. You don't want to be that person. So what machine learning may do is, if you put into patients' characteristics, it can predict whether that person's going to benefit, and it may be useful in identifying patients for future trials. We're seeing a lot of great applications in the United States, at least, for machine learning and AI, mostly in the imaging world, not as much in what I just showed you, which is the clinical outcomes world, but lots of great advances on the imaging side. We have to be careful, though. Correlation does not mean causation. This is one of my favorite slides. This is the divorce rate versus the consumption of margarine. They're highly correlated, but of course there's no causal relationship. And when you look at enormous numbers of relationships, you're going to come up with these acausal correlates. We also have to be somewhat careful with AI and machine learning, because it is a bit of a black box. One of my favorite examples of the limitations comes from a group that looked inside the black box and found that the ability of AI and machine learning to predict mortality was driven by the presence of a ruler on the screen. It had nothing to do with the melanoma, its shape, its color. It had everything to do with having a ruler on the screen. We want to make sure we're, doing research that makes sure we are using true patient characteristics to really have the predictive modeling work. So I do think digital health is going to play an important role in the future. I don't think all of this technology is going to replace physicians. I think these things are going to be complementary to, not compete with physicians. I also think that technology has to work for us. We shouldn't be working for the technology. In our country, we're entering a lot of information for the technology right now. Having information, health information, does not mean you have health care. We have a lot of work to do to provide access. But I do hope we will be able to put the patient back at the center of all of our care by using all these new tools. Well, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and I'll stop here and maybe you can unmute some people's lines and we can take some questions.
The people from the audience to ask questions. Do we have any question from the 6 years medical students?
I'm sorry, last time I put in mute. Thank you, Professor Gibson. Very interesting presentation. Do any audience student or doctor do have any question for Dr. Gibson? I have one question to Dr. Gibson. I think with the new method for study in developing country in Vietnam, we can participate with this study.
Can you participate in a study like this? This current study is just right now in the United States. It's that way because of the need to use the Medicaid, Medicare claims database. But in the future, the goal is to be able to use these kind of apps worldwide to, again, facilitate enrollment and make everything work much less expensively. So yes, hope Vietnam will participate, absolutely.
But the organization of Medicare of Vietnam is quite different from United States. I think that we need to reorganize something.
Yes, I understand. It could be tough with your system right now. But again, in the future, we should be able to come up with ways we can get everyone to participate.
Yeah. Any question, please?
Okay, I see the question in the chat box. First, how did you invite the participant?
Yeah, good question. We're using TV. We're using newspapers. We're using Facebook. We're using social media. Every way we can to reach the patients. And we're inviting them to participate in that way. They get randomized. They watch a video. They watch a video on the app. And once they learn about the study, they then get randomized to either a watch or no watch. And then they get their watch and they interact with the app to tell us about their outcomes. So we're trying to get them in a whole bunch of different ways.
Do we have any question from the two faculty from the School of Engineering? Because this is big data analysis. Professor Cao Tiến Dũng and Trần Vũ Khanh.
Hello, Dr. Thạch. Okay. So I just joined late, so I don't have the question about this because I don't understand about the medical.
Well, I think the good news, though, for you as a data scientist with petabytes of data, you should be able to learn a lot. That's what we hope for the data scientist. Lots of data.
Yeah.
So the question number 2 is that how could the Apple Watch fire again the other company success with the detect the AFib?
Yeah, I think I don't want to oversell the capability of the Apple Watch. This is really more of a screening tool. Unlike the first study, the Heartline study, that study, the Apple Watch just detected irregular heartbeats. If the watch detects irregular heartbeat with this study, the new thing is you put your fingers on the watch and it does a single lead EKG. That EKG is then sent over onto your iPhone, and you can then show that iPhone image to your doctor. The doctor makes the diagnosis. The Apple Watch is really a screening tool. So it's identifying asymptomatic AFib. It's then up to the doctor to do with that what would be their conventional or standard practice.
Hello, Josh. Can you ask Dr. Michael Gibson directly? If not, Lê Xuân Minh Phúc, you can ask him directly.
Hi, Dr. Michael. I'm a medical student. I would like to ask you think in the future with technology development don't need to skill from the doctor? Thank you.
Will the development do what to the doctor?
I mean, in the future about technology development, so we don't need to skill of doctor like medical. Yeah.
No, you're going to need doctors. Absolutely. No, none of this is going to replace doctors. It is just going to complement doctors. It won't compete with doctors, only complement doctors. So your job is safe. Your job is safe. Computer won't have done an internship. At the end of an internship, you look at a patient and you know if that patient is sick. A computer is just not going to have that kind of skill.
Okay, if no one have a question, I will have a question for you. So it's nowadays it's problem if not about the computer or computer science or medicine. It's not from the privacy problem because a lot of company is claim of the information of the patient is too much. And so what do you think about it? We need to the new policy for the research like this or something like this in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually give a whole talk about patient privacy. It's a big issue. It's a big issue in our country. People can actually steal your medical identity in our country, and they can start to charge you for drugs and costly medical expenses. That's a real disaster. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry in our country called medical identity theft. So we have to make sure that all of this is safe and secure. With the Apple study, all of the information is stored centrally at very high levels of encryption to protect patient privacy. You want privacy because patients don't want people to know about their diagnosis. They don't want to be potentially discriminated against in hiring or their jobs. So you highlight a very important issue, which is to protect patients' privacy.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, Dr. Gibson.
Yes.
Hello, Dr. Gibson. I'm Nguyễn from School of Biotechnology, Thành University. So I am actually not a medical doctor, but I just, I'm just working on like genomics and then big data analysis for cancer research as well. In your presentation, thank you very much. But I couldn't see even you working a lot for a lot other projects in medicine. But I just wonder, in kind of this situation in COVID-19, so a lot of patients, a lot of genomes, a lot of like genes and viruses. So in your opinion, your viewpoint, so how can you apply your technology as well, and then your some idea to apply the deep sequences, big data analysis, genomics, combined with other technologies, and give some prediction for the future of COVID-19, so we can have the model to modeling how it's work for the spreading of COVID-19 in the future. It's work, and then it's very nice for patient. And then also we can give some prediction, and we can find out some kind of regions. We can target some regions on the genes on the genomic chromosome, and then we may find out some kind of drug on the vaccine, and it's good for patient as well. So that is just my concerns. So could you share about that? Thank you very much.
Yes, great question. When I was 33, I developed ARDS due to varicella pneumonia and had multi-organ failure. So I have survived an infection like COVID-19. It wasn't because my immune system was weak, it's because my immune system overreacted in what we call a systemic inflammatory response. And what we're seeing is some people get really sick, some people don't get sick at all. And I think we all think instinctively that there's something about the patient that's playing a role. And I think you're on the right track when you say there's something going on genetically, I think, with why some people's immune system over-responds. So I think a first point of attack is to use genetic information to understand who's going to respond that way. I think that's number one. Number two, I would integrate in a lot of the patient characteristics. There's a paper from Columbia that's a preprint paper showing that high blood pressure doubles your risk. Well, is it the high blood pressure, or is the high blood pressure a marker of having something going on with your ACE receptors? Again, a genetic issue. So I think, we need to learn a lot more about the host genetics. I do think, obviously, AI and machine learning can do a lot to look at the shape of the virus and help develop drugs. I know that's going on as well. Sadly, we'll still have to do a lot of work testing drugs, and I think we have to be much, much, much more organized. Right now, the trials are too small to really draw firm conclusions. We need a national, if not an international program to enroll patients, use same definitions, use one control group. Not, if we're testing 10 drugs, we don't need 10 control groups. We can have one control group and test 9 drugs against that one control group. We would need to have central collection of all the events. So I don't think we're having a science failure right now as much as an organizational failure to get organized and look at these issues in the right way. But I do think this is going to be a great space for people like yourself to do machine learning.
Nhưng rất tiếc, clip meeting.
Thank you.
So how about in this case? So in this case, you have a lot of patient. How do you think about RCT? RCT in this case is very awesome. So we can do like randomized, you know, right?
We must do randomized trials. We must do randomized trials.
And then this time we have a lot of patients.
Yes. Well, we have a lot of deaths. You know, in our country, we have 2,000 people dying a day. We have enough events to answer these questions very quickly. We just aren't organized to do the RCT. It's a shame because we know how to do them. We know how to do big ones. It's a failure of leadership to get us organized.
In your technology, you have any kind of technologies, advanced technologies can support some medical doctor or some scientists? I'm also working on like a machine learning to give some kind of marker for cancer research. But in this case, AI, can you support like some company or like that to produce some kind of vaccine? You think it's possible or impossible?
Yeah, no, I think we already have tools for apps to teach people about what you're doing in a trial of a vaccine, to consent them with one consent, to provide follow-up where they tick if they have a fever or shortness of breath or any symptom, and we can do all that. And it's just, again, not a failure of you as a vaccine person or machine learning. It's not a failure of me as someone who does trials. It's a failure of the leadership to not allow us to be organized to test these questions in randomized trials. So it's sad the technologies exist, but we need to get them used to answer these really important questions.
Yeah, and then that is just the thing you are talking about. The thing is the data of patient, but I'm talking about like the detail inside, like how about inside the genome, like target inside the immune system. So if we can dive it inside, it's much awesome.
Oh yeah, you need to know. You need to collect blood, and you need to analyze the blood using your techniques, the genomic techniques, and then bring that together with the patient characteristics. So the patient, the exposome, what they're exposed to, proteome, environmentome, you know, your genome, all of it together to do big data. But we're just not, we could do it with apps. Apps say, where's your location? What's the temperature? You know, how far are you from McDonald's? Are you in a food desert? How much are you walking? Are you upright? Are you laying down? You know, you're sleeping. So we have so much data that could be easily collected now. This would be the ideal time to do it.
Right.
We're not doing it.
Now is the right time, I think.
If not now, when, you know? Yeah. So it's sad to see so many technologies not being used.
I would like to ask Professor Vinh to invite the Lê Xuân Minh Phúc. She is a second-year medical student. She had a question for Dr. Michael Gibson.
Okay. Student Phúc, can you pose a question? Use your microphone, pose a question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gibson. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you well.
Yes, thank you. It is my honor to have a questions with you. During your speech later, you say that researching is Google, but that is research you. I know there are many things about Google tracking user detail. But isn't that is better since it is optimize the search result for our medical student, because privacy is still an important thing right now. But isn't it better to share these informations between the learner and the informations, or maybe something about overloading data will affect the privacy of the patients? Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. We worked with Google for 2 or 3 years, and we had every week, Google and I would fight over what is the truth. Is the truth what everyone is saying it is based upon consensus, the wisdom of the crowd, which they seem to think, or is the truth what an expert says? And they took the view that it's the wisdom of the crowd. I said, well, if that's the case, then we would still think the earth is flat, because a lot of people thought the earth was flat for a long time. But it took a few people to say, look at that curve on the moon, you know, the earth is round. I think we have to have access to information. I do worry about how they rank content, and I learned a lot about this. What you see at the top of search results, you know, people are paying to get their page put up that high. So you may not find the best results, but you will be able to find some results. So it's not as great as it could be. The other thing you need to understand, as I pointed out, is Google is searching you. It's looking at all your preferences, and it's doing that, as you know, so that it can target advertising to you. So that's the trade-off. Are you willing to get some advertisement targeted at you? That's a little bit of loss of privacy, or the benefit of getting some search results brought to you. You have to understand, though, that some of those results are paid for. So it's not perfect. It's not perfect results, and it does not result in perfect privacy. But right now, it's the best we've got. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you for your
Students,
questions.
you can pose a question.
Hello, Duy. There is a question you wrote. Can you ask Dr. Michael Gibson directly?
Hello, may I have a question, please?
Yes, please.
Yeah, dear Dr. Gibson. I have 2 questions. So number 1 is, does China's unchecked expansion of data power AI raise specific concerns? And the number 2 is, really big data gives China's medical AI edge?
Does China scare me with respect to its collection of big data? Is that what you're saying? I have concerns. They do a lot of surveillance. They do a lot of surveillance of facial features. They do a lot of tracking of people. On the one hand, that violates people's privacy and is very concerning in that regard. There are some very practical applications, I guess. In a epidemic setting, they're able to probably track people easier if they've been infected. So there are some advantages. For our country, it wouldn't work that well because we value our privacy and our liberty. But that's not to say in other countries that is not a choice that they may make, but not for our country at present.
Any question from the audience?
Okay, we have a so funny question here. So in many information is sent to the Chinese. So what do you think about it?
Could you maybe repeat the question again?
Student have a question. Is the information is in the cloud is the sent to the China, and so what do you think about it?
So if the information is stored in the cloud and it's in China, could they get at that information? I guess you're asking. Well, you know, I think you can do the best you can to encrypt it, to try and do best you can to safeguard it. I don't think it matters whether it's in the cloud or not. I think these days, if someone wants to get at the information, they can get into your computer over the internet, to be perfectly honest. What we do with our valuable information is we put it on computers that are not hooked up to the internet. So for our data, it is not hooked up to the internet. The computer is not hooked up to Wi-Fi. The computers are not hooked up to the internet. No one could get into our computers to get at our data. I think that's probably one of the only ways in 2020 that you can safeguard your data.
Hello, there is a student named Nguyễn. Can you ask Dr. Michael Gibson directly?
Okay, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so in this world, nowadays as a medical student, so dear sir, I wonder that, so, you know, a small technical glitch can lead to a huge deterioration of the big picture. So it can lead to a numerous number like a false positive, like Nguyễn has said. So how can we do, like, what can we do to alleviate this problem by zero in on AI or, you know, human resources, or just 50-50? I know it's not a thing that a medical student can ask, but it's more like a technical one.
Yeah, I think obviously for human work, what we're doing is we're trying to open up the data so other people can analyze the data to see if someone made a mistake. We also have the peer review process where we can look at someone's paper and see, did they make a mistake in the math in the paper? When it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think it becomes tougher. You could give someone the same data set and see if they derive the same general kinds of relationships, but it's much tougher. I mean, so much of machine learning depends upon a lot of the parameters that you set. You know, I will never forget when I was working with some non-physicians, they had in the database, you know, if a bleed in the database is predicting bleeding, they had bleeding events. And of course, people who had bleeding events were more likely to have other bleeding events. I said, no, you can't have a bleeding event predicting a bleeding event. So that was a mistake that a non-medical person made in artificial intelligence. And that does worry me. If you don't have someone like myself looking over every variable that they're putting into the model, they can reach some really kind of crazy, nonsensical conclusions. I mean, they kept telling me, we can % sensitivity and high specificity who's going to have a bleeding event. And then I went through, and when we took out that variable, then it dropped drastically. So you're right, Quan, there can be mistakes. And we have got to, when it's a black box, like AI and machine learning, we've got to be much more careful about what we're putting into the black box. That's a good question.
There is a question of Lê Vũ Quân. Can you ask Dr. Michael Gibson directly?
Yes. Okay. So I have a question about quantity scientific research. That's how do you build up the questionnaire or the survey question?
Yeah. So you know, there's a lot of ways you can do this. If you want to do simple kind of questionnaires, what we're using these days is a Google spreadsheet, basically, and you put that form. It's a Google form, and you can put the Google form on the internet, and people will answer the question. You can also use SurveyMonkey. The other thing we use is RedCap. It's very inexpensive to use RedCap. But you know, for the study we're doing, Apple built the software for the app to put the questions in. But you know, there's a lot less expensive tools than having Apple build it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't want to ask the tool to build up the survey. I want to know, how do you set up the question, like what do you think about something, or how to the participation can answer the question. So I can do the research, depend on it.
Yeah. So let me tell you a few philosophical things. Don't ask questions where someone types in a whole bunch of text, because then you can't do the statistics. You need to ask questions that have yes or no, questions that have a number, questions that rank things, questions that have an answer of A, B, or C. So at the end of the day, you have to ask a question that you can analyze statistically. The other trick is to make sure, if you're asking a bunch of yes and no's, always put the answer yes before no, yes before no, yes before no. If you start putting yes, no, and then no, yes, yes, no, you got to keep your questions consistent. So I would say you have to ask questions that will, at the end, that you can analyze statistically. I hope I helped with that.
Yes, I understand. Thank you for your answer. Yeah.
My name is Duy. Do you hear me well? Can I ask you some questions?
Absolutely, yes.
What do you think about AI in the future on the medicine? As a medical student, what do we need to learn to stay ahead of the trend? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be good for you to learn a lot about not just AI, but I also think about traditional statistics. I think far too much time has been spent in medical schools teaching people anatomy, for instance, that they're going to forget. We shouldn't be learning things we can look up. We should be learning how to think. So you need to learn how to critically evaluate information. I think we must do a much better job of that. People have got to have a much better understanding of traditional statistics. After they understand traditional statistics, then I think they can learn more about AI and machine learning. Sometimes AI and machine learning does not offer you anything more than traditional statistics like logistic regression. Sometimes in the imaging world, it does offer more. But again, I think you need to learn a lot about AI and machine learning so you can make sure that the AI and machine learning is not just seeing a ruler on the screen, that it's really analyzing the melanoma, for instance. what I found, and how I taught myself and how my students teach themselves, is a lot of YouTube videos. There's a lot of very good YouTube videos on machine learning. You can just spend days sitting there watching, learning. I found, for me, as an auditory and visual learner, that was about the best way to go. And it's free.
I would like to ask Professor Vinh, can you invite the audience for the last question, because we have run out of time.
Okay, anybody? So one more question.
So hello, Thầy Vinh. I will ask the last question. So, dear Professor Michael, right now we want to build an AI model for the Vietnamese people. So, but we don't have enough medical record, digital medical record or something like the information. So, except the GEL open data access, could you recommend for us some data resource we can try to practice AI as soon as possible? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There are, I'm working with some companies that go through the medical records that then extract. It looks through the medical record and says if anyone had shortness of breath or cough or wheezing or all these symptoms, then it says that person may have had heart failure. It really begins with you having some records. If you don't collect it, as we talked about, how you need to collect it as yes, no, and those types of answers. If you don't have that, if you just have free text, you may want to investigate natural language processing, NLP, to get the data into a structured format. It's very challenging to do. There are companies who are been at it for 20, 30 years. It's very tough to do that, but you might find that worthwhile. The other thing you could do would be to send out surveys to patients using SurveyMonkey or something very inexpensive to collect the data that you don't have. But you have to have data. You need to be able to collect it cheaply, and you need to be able to collect it in a way that's not text-based, that is numeric, that's not nominal, it's ordinal. And maybe some surveys that you send electronically or mail to people might be your best shot. But you're right, you need data. That's a big limitation.
Okay, I would like to express my opinion before we have Professor Gibson. First, I would like to talk to students of THÄIU that we need to study to do in a student. We need to do clinical report, observational study, small real-time study, and RCT study, and after that, GIient study, something like Professor Gibson talked about. I think that we need to study some basic thing. I recall when I teach a student about echocardiography. I teach for more than 30 years. I want to ask our young doctor and student to do 14 basic view before doing other thing. So I'm very happy today to have Dr. Gibson to talk about for the study. As a doctor, we need to write a study. We need to participate in the study for understanding more about the management of patients. Thank you very much, Dr. Gibson.
Thank you. I'm very honored that you invited me back. And one of my favorite trips was to Vietnam. You have such a beautiful country with such beautiful people. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thad.
Good night.
Good night to everybody. Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye now.
Yes, thank you, and sorry about the trouble today.
Oh, don't worry. Tell Staphylococcus I said hello.
Zoom nó có vấn đề.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Cái Zoom này nó bị lỗi. Sorry mọi người.